In conversation with Katie Watson, Katie Watson spent years as a public relations executive and journalist, including six as editor-in-chief of Organ Business Magazine before embarking on a new career as a chef and restaurant owner. This is her debut novel. She lives in Hot River, Oregon, where she writes, leads a chef collective, and runs and hike the Columbia River Gorge with her husband, Stu and Satchel, the world's best dog. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Katie Watson. How are you doing today, Katie? Welcome on the show.
Oh, I'm doing quite well, and so honored to be your guest.
Yeah, it's my pleasure really to have you on the show today. When I first got an email introducing me to your Orphan of the Living, I was quite intrigued that, oh goodness, it's an amazing story, and I would love you to come on to talk about it.
You know, we really only know as much about our parents as they are willing to reveal to us,
Hmm.
and it was very difficult in my case because my father died when I was 5 years old, and my mother had a lot of addiction and mental illness issues.
Hmm.
So she told me bits and pieces of her life, but there was a lot of abuse that my brother and I experienced
Hmm.
as being her children. And in the process of seeking healing and understanding for myself,
Yeah.
I really felt like I needed to know her story better, to imagine what life must have been like for her.
Hmm.
But I didn't know enough about her story, which took place in the early 20th century. And but I knew enough about it to know it was one hell of a great story, and it was
Hmm.
very inspiring to me. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how I might write it and determined that the best way to write it was to write it as a novel because I didn't know enough of the truth of her life. So I was inspired then to begin focusing on it as a novel, taking the bits and pieces, the skeleton of
Hmm.
her life, if you will, and
Hmm.
adding the flesh and bones of invented scenes, dialogue, characters in some degree, and creating a story around her that began to reveal to me who she was and what she had experienced.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing inspiration leading to the making of. This is really amazing, really. And it's quite huge, quite beautiful how the story gets in place and make an eventual novel afterwards. So I want to say thank you very much for running us through this beautiful background towards the making of this
Thank
book.
you.
Now, Glenn grows up in an orphanage and the military. And Nora May suffers emotional neglect and abuse. I wanted to ask you, how did you approach finding their individual voices and emotional arcs?
Well, I knew the two of them, the characters that they are based on,
Mm,
quite well.
mm.
Norma is based on my mother, and Glenn is based on my most favorite relative of all time, my
Oh,
Uncle Glenn,
wow.
my amazing Uncle Glenn. And so I had some sense of who they were in real life, but in beginning to research them and understand where they lived, who they lived with, what some of their experiences were, and then begin to build stories around them, I feel like I was able to look into their souls. And
Mm,
at the end of that process, I felt like I knew them better than I had in real life. Do you know those moments that you have sometimes when you have like a shiver that goes up your spine when you just have this aha moment? There were times in writing the book, even though I was building a fictional structure around them, that I feel like I had moments of realizing this certainly must have happened to them. This is the way it must have actually occurred.
mm,
And it was quite a blessing to me to write this book because it helped me to understand myself so much better and to have more compassion for my mother, who was a very, very difficult person.
Hmm. Oh wow, that's an amazing. Please, I'd like you to show the book to the camera. That's an amazing story you've got, really. And look at that, Orphans of the Living. Even from the title alone, it's so captivating. Could you tell us about the making of this cover? Because I think there's a story behind it.
Sure. The photo, I will just say, is an actual historic photo taken by an American woman photographer named Dorothea Lange. She was very famous for her depiction of the Great Depression and the Jim Crow South, which is, of course, important times that take place in the novel. And so my publisher and I looked through a lot of her photographs and picked this one, which
Mm,
is, I think, of a young man holding a cotton sack in the state of Mississippi,
mm,
which was one of the original slaveholding states in the United States, but also a place where oppression through the Jim Crow laws continued for many, many years after the
mm,
Civil War.
mm.
So that's the where the image comes from. The phrase orphans of the living. Um, you mentioned Glenn, the character Glenn.
Yeah.
He was left in the American state of Montana
Mm,
because his parents, uh, Barney and Lula Stovall, went there hoping to farm through a law called, it'll come to me. It's an act that gives land to people, 160 acres to farm.
mm.
And if they can stay on the land for 5 years and prove it up, make it work, make a farm out of it, they can have it.
Oh wow.
Um, this was in the teens, 1915, 16, 17, 18, 20, around there. Um, But the land that was available was very poor land, rocky, bad soil, not a lot of water. So
Mm,
many families came there to take advantage of this land, but then they would almost starve to death. In fact, many of them did starve to death.
wow.
So they would put their children in orphanages. There were a lot of orphanages in the state of Montana at this time. And the orphanage would hold the children for them, and the parents would hope to return and take them someday, but in many cases, they never returned. So
Mm,
the children who were left in the orphanages who had actual parents who were alive were called orphans of the living. And
mm,
in the research that I did for trying to understand Glenn's time in the orphanage, when I read the board of directors notes from these orphanages that I found in historical records.
wow.
And I saw this phrase, Orphans of the Living. I knew instantly that it would be the title of the
Oh
book.
wow.
Because it was not just Glenn who was abandoned by his parents, who were still living. It was my mother, who was
Mm,
also her mother tried to abort her before she was born, would
wow.
never love her old or hold her, and
Mm.
rejected her. So she was also an orphan in plain sight, if you will. She was abandoned in plain sight.
Oh wow. I must say that's an emotional story you've just told us around the making of that phrase, orphans of the living. Because even when I saw it, I was like, it's not just a disconnection
Mhm.
that isn't death, but absence. And that's a very deep story. I can imagine what it feels like back in those days, having to go through all of these experiences. That must
Yeah.
have been very tough, really. That must have
Yes, I'm
been very
sure it
tough.
was. To feel rejected, to feel that your
Mm,
parents didn't want you.
mm,
Uh, Unfortunately, that happens to many children are in danger around the world today.
mm,
So
yeah,
Um, I think it will resonate with many people who know the peril that children have.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, Katie, the novel also draws from your mother's family history and touches deeply on the realities of the Jim Crow South, sharecropping, and the Great Depression. Now, I wanted to ask you, what made you want to turn that personal history into a novel? And how did you go about researching the racial and economic struggle that shaped the Strovo's journey? I would love your answer to this.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, 1900 to 1945, at the end of the war, was such an interesting time in world history. I mean, it was the development of the automobile, the development of flight,
Yeah.
right? Incredible medical and scientific advances, amazing literature, the growth
Mm,
of American jazz and blues, some of the most influential music in the world. A really incredibly interesting time, not just here in the United States, but, throughout the world. So I was fascinated by that time period. I always have been.
mm,
And it just so happened, of course, that my mother and her family, so much of what happened to them occurred during that period. So that became my focus. But right now in the United States, there is a lot of fiction going on about um, racism, sexism, poverty.
mm,
The current administration here would like us to believe that those things actually never really happened,
mm,
and they're certainly not happening today. But we know that's not true.
mm.
Our lived experience tells us
Absolutely.
that those things that the administration wants us to believe are not true. We need to teach children that these things happened
Mm,
because they impact us into the next generation. My children and my grandchildren are affected by what my family experienced in those years. Um, and while most of my sympathies lie with Black Americans and what they suffered,
mm,
impoverished, undereducated, um, white families like my mother's also were deeply impacted by that level of racism and sexism. They
mm.
had no tools or understanding of how to be different and
Wow.
how to have a different approach. So I don't want us to forget that these things happened.
Mm,
I want us to remind ourselves that they happened and are still happening.
mm. Oh, wow. And what better way can we remind ourselves, if not by writing amazing novels like yours, which tends to stay forever, even long after we are all gone and departed from this world? Those who we left here would read and understand, and yet to keep the legacy and story ongoing in a way that it never dies, never gets swept under the carpet. That's an amazing one you've done, really. Quite commendable.
Thank you so much.
That's
Very
really
kind of you.
great. Really great. And you also want to go much further because the novel beautifully captures life in the early 20th century. What is it about that time period that resonates with you most deeply? I would like your take on that.
I think probably the thing that affects me most deeply about that time is this big mm, uh, the balance of the very bad things that were
Mm,
happening that we talked about, the Depression, Jim Crow South,
yeah.
poverty, and the really amazing, wonderful things that were happening, advances in science and literature and music that could benefit all of the world. So here we have these two ideas that we have to hold in our mind at the same time.
Mm,
Incredible goodness and advances for the human society, and incredible roadblocks to equality for all. So
mm.
that's the most interesting part of that time for me.
That's great. That's an amazing one. And getting to get all of your responses so far, the discussion have been so amazing to me, really. Now, I wanted to ask you, how much of Orphans of the Living is true, and how much of it is fiction? What ratio would you give it if you had to say, okay, I'll give it a ratio of fiction to non-fiction, because I love to do that so much. And also, since
Oh,
the story is based on your mother's family, what made you decide to turn it into a novel?
well, in terms of, I'll take that part of the
Ratio.
question first. Why I needed to write it as a novel. And the reason that I needed to write it as a novel is that I simply didn't have enough information about
Mm,
what happened to my mother during that time. I
mm,
did not have a very good
facts.
historical record. You know, if someone, a historian, decides to write a book about a famous person
Mm,
in the same time period, they have letters, they have newspaper stories, but there just wasn't that much about my family.
mm,
So, if I wanted to tell the emotional truth of their lives, I needed to make it a novel. And one thing too, I love dialogue. I love listening to people talk to each other. And of course, I had none of that. So it all had to be created. In terms of how much of it is fiction and how much of it is true, I would say there's a little fiction and a little truth on every page.
mm,
Um, uh, many times well, I'll just give you an example. One
okay.
example. My mother had said to me that her father, Barney, who's one of the four main characters in the book, had once gone to Mexico to raise and to import bananas to the
Mm,
United States. That's all
wow.
I knew. So I started researching what was happening with bananas, growing them, importing them to the United States during that time period.
Mm,
And I found records of my grandfather on board ships coming to the United States from the east coast of Mexico. So I knew he was bringing bananas back.
mm,
And I found out about the largest corporation in the world at the time was called United Fruit.
mm,
And it was owned by Southern U.S. businessmen who took
mm,
the Jim Crow laws with them into Central and South America and used it to control the indigenous workers in those areas,
mm,
mostly people of, you know, uh, Mexican backgrounds or in northern Central America and South America. And so they took these horrible laws and they took them with them right into the area where my grandfather had gone to grow bananas.
mm,
So that is true. And then I took my grandfather and placed him there. I knew he was there. I knew he'd been there.
mm,
And I watched the story of what happened to him unfold in my mind, and I wrote it.
mm.
So there's a little research, a little bit of family knowledge, and a little bit of fiction in every part of the book.
That's an amazing answer you've said that over there. That's so beautiful. And that actually resonates so much with me. Because there's a book I'm actually currently working on, even though it's based on the initial stage of it was based on a real life story. But I don't know everything in totality. And I don't
Yeah.
love to question people. Like, oh no, there's some things that some people would not like to talk about. So I thought, okay, since I don't have all of the information, I'm going to add mine
Yes.
fictionalized,
Yes.
imaginary, and just mix it all together and say,
Hmm.
yeah, this is fiction. So I can relate to you saying that that's such a beautiful technique. Eventually, you have the story written, which is also remarkable. You can say, okay, this part was true. I can easily tell my kid in the future that, okay, this actually happened to somebody close to me. And they can, like, oh, then if I get questioned, how about this? So what happened? Oh, no, that part is not true. I came up with it myself, but this part was actually reality. It's still helping preserving stories. That's an amazing one.
Yes. Well, there's a common, not a common term, but I'm hearing it more and more used in as a genre, if you will, called autofiction. Have you heard this term
Yeah, I've heard
before?
about that. Autofiction.
Yes. And some people have suggested to me that this Orphans of the Living is autofiction. I suppose you can say that. I mean, novel. I think novel serves just as well. So,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. That's an amazing one. And I'm actually tempted to ask you, what sort of feedbacks have you received so far since the publication of the book? What has people been saying that you significantly love? Or I would say you do not love?
You know, Well, it's been getting very good reviews, for which I'm very thankful. I just received a 5-star review just last night from
Oh,
a reviewing organization called Literary Titan.
yeah.
So I'm happy for the early reviews because, as you know, I think this last week there were, around 2,500 new books published just in the United States. So
Wow.
it's a crowded field out there for books.
Mm,
And so I'm happy for the reviews. I think some people have expressed to me that the book is hard to read because I'm very honest about what happened
mm,
to my family, my mother. Um, I really, really, really thought seriously about the language that I used in the book,
yeah.
which will be controversial with some.
Mm,
It is not accepted, and I agree that a white person should never use the N word. That is completely wrong.
mm,
But I do have very racist characters in my book who are white people who use that word because that is how they would have spoken.
mm,
And I made a conscious decision to write it as honestly as I possibly could
mm,
of what I believe they would have said and how they would have said it. So that will be controversial for some, but I'm more than willing to have a discussion about why I chose to do that. And I feel completely at peace in my heart that I did the right thing. We can't overcome racism by covering it over or
mm,
being nice about it. We need
mm.
to say it like it is
Absolutely.
and force people to look at it the way that it is. And
Mm,
so I hope that I have added to that conversation.
mm. That's a very good point you've raised. A meaningful one, a one quite striking, and one even very much screaming in our current world because it still
Mhm.
persists in one form or the other. People hide it under the carpet and stylishly, bring out those colors, those behavior, those habits deemed fit. Quite amazing. I mean, I love your answers to this question and your book. It's really a thought-provoking one quite worthy of reading. So thank you very much, really. This is really impressive.
Thank you, Peter.
This
It's
is
been a
very
pleasure.
impressive. Yeah. And just apart from Authors of the Living, do you have any other works that you've authored or say currently working on?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I have completed a memoir
Oh,
of my life that actually begins sort of at the end of Orphans. I put myself as a character inside the book, Orphans
oh,
of the Living, and I'm there in the last 2 chapters as a little girl. But the memoir is really of my life, from my childhood on. So it's almost like a sequel to the novel, but it's all a memoir. So it's,
wow.
as truthful as I can make it. And that is, my publisher has already optioned that book, and I hope that it will be out in the spring of 2027.
Hmm.
And the working title right now is Last Morning at Nora's Table. Um, and then I'm also about halfway through writing a second novel, a third book,
Wow.
but also a novel that's sort of a near future political thriller in the United States, something a little bit different for me. But
Yeah. Another genre.
yes.
Wow, this is so amazing, and it's such an interesting blend for you to even consider this memoir to be a sequel to Orphan of the Living. That sounds like, oh, really? Okay, that's very interesting. That gives us amazing, interesting feeling, really. Oh, that's gonna be
Well,
very fun.
I'm excited about it. And it will include, oddly enough, recipes
Oh,
because much of my life as an adult was spent as a chef. And so each of the chapters has recipes along with it, which
mm,
people have read, who have been beta readers have said they made the recipes while they were reading the book. So that was very fun
really?
here. Yeah.
That was so fun, really. That would have been very amazing. Me reading a book and having to go and text. Yeah, I'm gonna try this in the kitchen. Okay,
Yes.
this part I'll add this, add that. That's a lovely one, really. Oh, that's beautiful to know. Thank you
Thank you,
for
Peter.
sharing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I wanted to get to hear your advice for, as a published author that you are, what sort of advice would you give a struggling writer, those who are still struggling with writing and say
Mm.
publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category?
Well, I would say let's get out the big guns of philosophy. Let's go right to Yoda in Star Wars, who said, "Do or do not do. There is no try." And
Hmm.
I think if you want to write, you simply have to put your butt in the seat
Do
and
it.
put your fingers on the keyboard and
Hmm.
write, and know that the real task of writing is rewriting.
Hmm.
So you're never going to have it the way you want it on the first go, but you have to
Yeah.
put it on the page and
Abs
come back. You know this, Peter. You're a writer. You have to come
absolutely.
back and rewrite,
Hmm.
and that's a long process.
Yeah.
Uh, so people, I think, become a little stiff or concerned because they're afraid to put that first word on the page. Just let it out and
Hmm.
know that you'll have to come back and edit and
Hmm.
rewrite. And sometimes many times. So, not to be afraid to do it. What's to be afraid of? It's just you and your keyboard, right?
You know, no third eyes, no
Yes,
middleman now. Nobody's gonna tell
right.
you that, oh no, that was wrong. No, just do it first.
No, it's
Just
just
continue.
you. Yes,
Continue and just do it on the paper and get it rolling, first of all.
yes,
Ama-
exactly.
Amazing advice you've got, Katie. Thank you very much. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And
You're
just in case we
welcome.
have some viewers who are watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of Orphans of the Living. On what platform is it available on for purchase?
Well, I can't always say for your part of the world, but I know that in the United States, it's
Yeah.
available in all independent bookstores around the country beginning September 30th. And
Oh.
you can order it online from all the big places, Amazon, Goodreads. My book is distributed by Simon and Schuster, so on the Simon
Oh,
and
it's here in
Schuster
the UK.
website,
Perfect.
it's there. So any place you would buy books online
Mm,
that you have access to in Britain or around the world should have the book listed, and it'll be available on September 30th,
mm.
2025, just in less than 2 months.
Wow, that's amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Katie Watson's book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on the publisher's website, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining me in conversation around your amazingly written Orphans of the Living. I must say this is more than awesome, very great, quite exciting, intriguing, and mind-blowing having you sit and talk about this wonderful, lovely novel. Thank you very much. This is more than exciting.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.